that was your Karen, was it?
Subscribe. Like. Hit the bell icon. Let's begin the story. I hope you like it. Naruto Cross Luffy.
Part 5. It was a miracle that the spine of Urich had not yet crumbled. But contrary to Sasuke's expectations, not a hair on his opponent's face was harmed, as just moments later, the monk dusted his robes, ignoring the blood coming from his mouth as if he had not just been launched through the ground at speeds that broke the barriers of sound itself. Once he rose up, Urich cracked his knuckles and got ready to fight once again, his disturbing smile still carved onto his face. Sasuke narrowed his eyes and became guarded, carefully considering his opponent. He did not want to take this carelessly and drag out this fight more than needed, neither did he have any interest in finding out the tricks of Urich either. But he was curious to know why had the monk just increased minutely in size. Urich, who kept grinning, spoke. That constant smile was beginning to annoy him. One good hit does not mean anything. If you are stronger than me, then I would simply take that strength and use it against you. I have not come this far to lose. Sasuke narrowed his eyes, as the huge man once again came at him, but this time with speeds he knew should have been impossible for someone such as him to achieve before. Had Urich been holding back all this time, or was this something else entirely? The ground below was torn to pieces as the sheer force of his movement ripped a trench into the earth. A loud clap resounded across the clearing as the sound barrier was ruthlessly desolated by an unstoppable force that held no elements of any grace or elegance. It startled him for a second. That exponential boost in power had almost increased his parameters tenfold. Sasuke was well aware of the fact that this kind of surge was not normal, for even he had only seen it seldomly before, and even then only in users of curse marks, 8 gates, and Jinchuriki. Besides, his words. What exactly did he mean when he said that he would take his power and use it against him? You can absorb energy and use them to increase your own strength. Sasuke observed even as Urich grinned wider in response, confirming his thoughts. These kinds of powers were not foreign to him. He had fought users of Preta Path before and knew how to deal with men such as him. So, when Urich came upon him once again, Sasuke did not simply dodge as he had been doing all along. Instead, he pulled his shoulder and once again pivoted on his back leg, only this time using the momentum of his movement to spin around with his left foot outstretched. It was a kick incomparable to any other Urich had seen before, crashing into him with the force of 1,000 elephants as his jaw snapped shut close, and vision almost went black as every organ in his body shook in agony. But before Urich could even gather the time to collect himself, Sasuke moved just again. His foot that had been used to kick Urich had barely even touched the ground before he used it to kick the ground jump high above gracefully and landed on the shoulders of the pirate with a flip that was executed with practiced ease. A simple tap on the bundle of nerves above his jaw from his right hand stole from Urich the capability to speak, as his jaw was locked into place bereft of all movement. Using his other hand, Sasuke gripped the nose of the pirate and squeezed. Arg! With a jaw that could not be opened and a nose that was blocked, the pirate was left with no conceivable way to breathe. If Urich could absorb the energy from the impact of Sasuke's strikes, then he would simply choke him to death. It was already too late by the time Urich realized what Sasuke had planned. He did not possess the skill, had not yet absorbed enough power to escape from the grip of the shinobi who held him with elegant care. All his struggles were hopeless beyond this point. Sasuke watched with cold eyes, occasionally dodging the blows crudely thrown at him from an angle too awkward to even make him bulge had they connected, as the struggles of Urich continued to weaken and weaken. Finally, a moment or two passed as the eyes of the pirate rolled to the back of his head and his huge body dropped to the ground with a resounding thud. Sasuke did not need to look at his surroundings to know everyone had stopped fighting and was looking at him strangely. The men in robes that were most probably the companions of the now unconscious monk had already thrown their weapons to the ground, for they had already lost their will to fight after seeing their captain being so soundly defeated and promptly surrendered. It was clear as day that they were afraid of him, and they were not the only ones. The fighters of Skypiea too had fear in their hearts, He could sense it as clearly as he could sense the warmth of the sun on his back. It was the injured man who he had saved who first hobbled his way toward him. He had something in his hands. Sasuke could clearly see what and raised a simple brow when he reached it. The man extended his hand. He had handcuffs made of stone. The walk back was awkward, to say the least. He led them from a distance of several paces, far enough for the sound of his own footsteps to drown out those of the local group even as they together entered the town. The oppressive atmosphere had made it a difficult task to bridge the gap, physical or otherwise. Skypiea, they called it. A constituent nation of the so-called White Seas, a name that served as a reminder of the frankly absurd location he was currently on, that is, a floating landmass encompassing a major part of the flying imperial cumulus, before the constant warfare scarred its land and divided its people. The very same people whose descendants claimed to be part of a race that was once one of the former residents of the moons themselves, though Sasuke did not know which one, who were forced to descend to the lower world because of scarce resources. Sasuke remembered grinning as one of the many questions that eluded him was finally answered, a slow, widening smile that had eventually stretched so wide that had his friends seen it, they might have instantly declared him a madman, though he would forever insist that he had smirked rather than smiled dumbly as a fool. Besides, who else but a madman would even so much as entertain the very notion of his situation? A daydreamer such as Shikamaru, perhaps, but he was anything but that, and no fleeting afternoon fantasy was as real as the world he saw before him. He might have considered this second chance as a blessing years ago, back when revenge dominated his thoughts and anger clouded his rationality. But any sprouting feelings of elation he may have had at the thought of a world where he might not be judged for his sins, a world where he could finally be accepted, were swiftly shattered, ground under the heel of the revelations of what a new life in this world would mean. It would have been liberating had the circumstances been different, but the chains of uncertainty had taken their place. In this new world, he was nothing, he had nothing. No identity, no family, no friends, no purpose. He'd even been stripped of his chakra, the ever-present hum of power reverberating through his body had faded entirely. This particular emotion was unfamiliar to him, few were the moments in which he was paralyzed by doubt. His intellect had always been a defining trait, and even now he knew his options, and what he had to do to make a life for himself here, but it was his will that was being shaken. He alone was left to appreciate this new dull tranquility, and he could not help but feel that he was the least deserving. The world he had left behind and those few who truly cared for him, precious people, as Naruto often called them. Sasuke used his right hand to wave off the guards accompanying them as a part of the delegation departed with urage and chains made of stone. His mind was occupied by other concerns, namely, the revelations given to him by these people. Sasuke, was it? Began Wiper, the apparent leader of the God's Guards, a sort of police force from what he could gather, a tall man with tanned skin and long braided hair that reached his lower back with a tattoo around his left eye that went down the accompanying shoulder. He trivially held a huge gun in his hand, and a cigarette loosely hung from his mouth as if it had always belonged there. I might not have believed what I had seen some time ago had my comrades not sworn that they witnessed the same with their own two eyes. Sasuke inclined his head to show he was listening. The pause and the step of the delegation as they waded through the town he had seen before, as well as the whispers that erupted from the onlookers, told him he wasn't the only one. However, before we discuss them, I would like to offer an apology of sorts. His eyebrows raised. He heard sounds of shock from the eavesdroppers. Wiper continued undeterred. You were involved in an incident under our jurisdiction, forced to deal with a dangerous fugitive we should have dealt with. He paused, frowning as he clearly struggled with words. Regardless of the ease with which you did so, a stranger should not have been forced to intervene in an event we were supposed to resolve. You have our gratitude for saving us from what might have been a crisis we were ill-prepared to face. I appreciate the sentiment, but I shall have to humbly disagree with the latter segments of your statement. Sasuke shrugged nonchalantly, glancing back at the group with his raven eye. The situation did not seem that dire to me, and it was certainly no national disaster. I imagine you warriors might have handled it on your own had I not decided to intervene. Sasuke deliberately slowed his pace, even as the others around them cheered in agreement, until he was striding aside the rest of the group, and tried to ignore the gaze he was receiving from Wiper behind him. Cuckoo! You heard him. One of the warriors smirked, having mistaken his observation for praise. We would have been fine even without any help. Those lawless pirates were no match for us. The others laughed as his back was thumped by another warrior who nodded in agreement even as others laughed. He very much doubted they would be entirely won over with praises, of all things, but it had served as an ample peace offering. Any lingering tension that might have arisen had now almost certainly disappeared, muffled by the soft patter of the group's footsteps, his own now indistinct among them. It remains uncertain whether we could have even repelled him without incurring heavy losses. The casualties that course of action would have caused was bound to put our nation in dire straits. Wiper lastly broke his quiet. Perhaps we could have dealt with Urich himself, but certainly not without considerable damages to both our people and our nation. The spirit of any kingdom undermines its defenses. Sasuke responded, people rise against kings, new pacts are made, and even holy laws deteriorate. Your nation would not fall as long as its people continue to remember the ideals it stands upon. Wise words. Wiper smiled softly at his words, his tense shoulders relaxing as he too joined the rest of his comrades by walking alongside him. You have sharp insight, Sasuke from the Blue Seas. Not as sharp as yours it seems. Sasuke glanced back at his temporary companions with cool regard. You were not surprised when I appeared, nor were you astounded intervened in that fight, almost as if you knew what was about to happen. Wiper stopped in his tracks, frozen in shock by the observation Sasuke had been questioning for quite some time. The emotion was shared by the members of his group, and even the demeanor of those that had been laughing beside him had shattered to make way for disbelief. Silence reigned, and Sasuke did not miss the glances these warriors shared at his inquisitive words. The more they left out, the more they highlight what they leave in. It was the job of a shinobi to look underneath the underneath. They knew something he did not, and he was particularly eager to find out exactly what. Few amongst us are natural users of mantra, and the rest have been learning from Isa. Wiper frowned, visibly hesitating with dull indecision for a single fraction of a second before he responded. It is only natural that your appearance could not surprise us, for we had already been informed of your impending arrival. It seems that he had been arrogant. Sasuke then understood, even as his mind immediately jumped to the implications. Mantra. He whispered, testing the word over his tongue. He had been far too arrogant for someone of his profession, allowing decadency to cloud his rational instinct as a shinobi. I have a question. Sasuke spoke. Is this mantra of yours some sort of natural power that one must be born with, or is it a technique that can be learned by anyone? Some are born with it, but all can learn it. Wiper answered, Isa is perhaps one of the only Shanjian born with the power, but with the information left behind by Enel we know that even normal people can harness its powers. And this mantra, what exactly does it do? Broadly speaking, it is an extrasensory power that grants the user a sixth sense that allows them to sense the presence, strength, intent, and even the emotions of others. It was what allowed us to sense your presence on the island before we even made contact. Which brings me to my next point, he continued, taking his silence as acceptance, and that is your appearance here above the Blue Seas. It need not be said that we fully intend to repay the favor owed. Regardless, it is our duty to know why an outsider has chosen to visit our lands above the Blue Seas. Sasuke raised a brow and turned to face the group. These men were almost naked, clad in nothing but what appeared to be grass skirts and animal pelts. Decorating skin with ink and art also seemed to be common. Sasuke could see that almost all of them had numerous tattoos adorning the arms, the chests, and in some unique cases, even the faces of the warriors. Are people not allowed to enter the island, or does the question stem from a personal curiosity? He asked after a moment. Why are you here? The man asked again, blatantly ignoring his question even as his single onyx eye narrowed. You are from the Blue Sea, right? It must not be easy reaching our shores. Sasuke paused for a moment and his eyes narrowed further, as the men around him tensed in response. It would do him no good to antagonize these guards for no apparent reason. He needed his answers after all. Moreover, he truly meant them no harm, and Sasuke knew that the regard was only mutual. These only seemed to be following orders. Besides, if this world was anything like his, he would have been forcefully captured, interrogated, and if found wanting, killed without mercy were he to be caught by any law enforcement agency without proper proof of identification. In hindsight, this seemed almost tame. Yes, I heard about this place before in Jaya, so much so that I could not help but come here to witness it myself. Sasuke spoke, his narrowed eyes softening as he for perhaps the first time decided to use restraint. I must say, this place indeed does live up to its reputation as the legendary Sky Island, one of the most astounding archipelagos I have ever had the pleasure of seeing. It was the truth, even aside from the location itself. The island was of the most magnificent formation of nature he had the pleasure to see with his own eyes. The infamous Turtle Island of Kumo might have closed, but unfortunately, he had not had the opportunity to grace that island himself, having only heard tales of it from others. But in his humble opinion, which was almost always accurate, an island on the clouds would beat an island on the back of a giant turtle any day of the week, no matter what a certain blonde may say. The man wearing the hat beside him looked visibly elated when he heard, "So, Jaya, you say?" "So the sound of the bell reached the blue sea?" he softly asked, with happiness etched on his face. "Naturally so." Sasuke nodded. He had no idea what the man was talking about, but just as truth need not always be right, some falsehoods were not wrong. People of Jaya dream of it. They say it was the most beautiful sound ever heard. It is a dream of many people to one day visit this place, the islands above the sky. The men around him grinned gently, some even cheered and some chuckled softly. They were simple words, but they cut through the tension as smoothly as his Kusanagi could cut through steel. Sasuke had always let his actions speak, but sometimes words could be of much more worth than power. Naruto had taught him that. Itachi had taught him that. "You are fortunate." One of them laughed, his voice loud but welcoming all the same. "If you were here a few days ago, we would have introduced you to death first and asked questions later. Count your lucky stars, we have already announced our presence to the world. I doubt you would have received many answers from a corpse." Sasuke smirked at the man in response, "Even if you could back your words with action, that is." The man, Kamakiri, from what he had disconcerted, spluttered in mock indignation even as the rest chuckled at his expense. Some bystanders stopped work for a moment or two to glance at them, but most seemed too busy with construction to spare more than a moment or two for a stranger, wanting the new town to be completed as soon as possible. "We are Kami's guards. It is our protect this island in Kami's name against any threat." He finally replied in a dull monotone as if he'd rehearsed it beforehand, even as the others laughed at him. Sasuke's eyes narrowed at the world. It was a topic of his interest, and he had been meaning to breach this subject himself. A god, Kami as the locals called it. The word itself had long been associated with bad memories he would rather forget. But he could not allow a lead about gods worshipped by people who had descended from the moon to be left unchecked. "Kami, was it?" Sasuke hummed. "So are you people some sort of warrior priests?" "No! We are not priests," the jubilant Kamakiri almost snarled, and Sasuke paused as he received a reply that came harsher than he had expected, even as the expressions of the guards around sobered up almost instantly. Something truly dark had passed through the eyes of these warriors, something Sasuke took note of. For he knew it as well as he knew the sound of his own heart and the hum of his mother's voice. It was hatred. Raw hatred that burned brighter than any fire could. "I apologize, it was not my intention to insult you." He softly spoke, yet his voice had a hint of steel in it. The comparison was not meant to be an affront. It is only natural to associate monks and priests with gods, but I spoke thoughtlessly regardless. "No, it's fine." It was Wiper who responded with a sigh. "It was just that only some time ago, we were forced to risk ourselves against Enel's priests in order to get our homeland back," the Shandian warrior explained, so the comparison was not exactly flattering. "This Enel and his priests, who were they?" Sasuke asked, after a moment. "Why did they take over your home anyway?" Wiper shared a long look with Kamakiri as Sasuke moved to take a closer look at the busy town around him. He seemed as if he were searching for something. His eyes constantly moved about but never stopped on anything for more than a moment. He decided to indulge him. Sasuke had done them a great favor, and they had already declared the existence of Saipia when that Straw Hat Kid had rung the light of Shandora for the world to hear. Besides, this was no great secret to be guarded so resolutely. Enel was a tyrant who came here from another sky island named Burka about 6 years ago. He brought along his followers and wasted no time in taking down Gonfor, the kami of that era. Kami, as in God? Sasuke asked, trying to hide his curiosity as well as he could. Yes, that is what we call our leader. Wiper suddenly snapped at the interruption, before he paused and continued. As I was saying before the interruption, Gonfor was defeated quickly, but we did not care much about his fall, for he too was our enemy at the time. When Enel took over as kami, the only thing that changed for us was we had to fight him instead of Gonfor. And so he began. He regaled to him a tale about grand events that spun through eons of history. He sang of bravery and cruelty and told poems that revered the honor and courage of the fallen. Someone needed to tell those tales. When the battles were fought and won and lost, when the gods fell with their vast treasures and tyrants ruled over kingdoms, someone needed to tell the bits of the overlapping narrative that no one knew of, and Sasuke knew once they began that these men were more than eager to share the tales no one in the Blue Seas knew of. They told him everything about the struggle for homeland, how islands were thrown into the sky, the history of Shandians and Scipions, alongside Ganfor's struggle at peace. He was told about Enel's rule and the light of Shandora. Sasuke slowly drank in his every word as if his tales were songs to him. For as long as human history goes on, the past would also continue to accumulate. History was not just records of the past. It was also proof that civilization had advanced to the present. The current present was a result of the past. Who would have thought a place this beautiful has such sad history? Sasuke murmured honestly after it ended. The brightest lights sometimes cast the darkest shadows. Things are not always as they look. Wiper nodded in agreement. Our people have struggled, but we have emerged all the greater for it nonetheless. A soft quietness fell upon them, as they all thought of ideals greater than life with 1,000 varying emotions, that dreams do come true, but if only they wish hard enough. That one can have anything in life, but if one sacrifices everything else for it. You ask a lot of questions. Kamakiri broke the moment, seeming somewhat annoyed that they had been questioned to such an extent. Far too curious for a simple traveler. I too cannot fathom your interest in knowledge regarding our culture and history. Wiper nodded in agreement. Sasuke, what exactly do you want? At that, his gaze along with those of his companions turned expectant. It seemed that these people had a penchant for simple, catch-all questions. I simply want answers to personal questions that are exceedingly important to me. And you believe we may be able to assist you in this endeavor? You previously mentioned a favor owed for defeating. Sasuke instead answered, I wish for each of my questions to be answered for as long as they do not pose a threat to the interests of the people of this island. In return, I would answer any of your questions regarding the surface. A cultural exchange, if you will. I believe I am owed that much. Wiper looked at the man before him for a moment, thinking about it for a moment before he nodded. He had indeed helped them, and if all he was asking for was simple information that would not harm his people, then he could only comply. Sasuke had remained awake, contemplating the previous events of the night. In truth, part of him had still been trying to rationalize the existence of this world without chakra, as any sane person in his place would. Not that it necessarily mattered. He had never been the sort of fool to deny reality and allow himself to remain delusional for the little comfort denials would bring him. But Sasuke allowed himself to relax and focus on the future that lay ahead of him. As whimsical as these people from Skypiea were, they were the sort to choose dance and storytelling over outrage and accusations, and lowering his guard here on the islands in the sky was far safer than doing so on Jaya. His mind constantly played one question again and again on repeat. What was he doing? How long had it been since he arrived here, in this world? How long since he had been mired in his own indecisiveness? Was he to ignore the trembling of his hands as he lay awake during long nights, thinking of home? Would he allow himself to stagnate, or would he move forward? He'd once denounced both the Kage for their stagnancy and their refusal to pave a future, and yet here he was doing the same. It was staggering, the depths of his own arrogance. To think he would be granted resolution if he just waited. No blonde-haired dope would appear here to grant him a solution. He had to keep moving onward and pave his own path with his own two hands. In retrospect, the paths before him were simple: the Marines, the warlords, and the pirates. Marines and pirates, which consisted of both the just and the wicked, comprised the majority of this world's power base. The warlords had their own power base and hierarchy, the world's strongest swordsmen foremost among them, but remained unconsolidated in both allegiance and unity, instead dividing their resources for the government in the open and against it in the shadows. They could be considered the weakest of the three factions. The existence of three, in fact, was a blessing. It allowed for a tentative balance, and though the current ceasefire looked unlikely to evolve into a peace, no faction would act alone for fear of retribution returned twicefold. The power struggles of this world's residents, despite having fewer intricacies and positions, held an unerring similarity to both the system of hidden villages and that prevalent during the clan war era, piqued no little amount of his curiosity. This world had not seen a full-scale international world war for the better part of a century, not in the manner of the great ninja wars of his elemental nations, but the current state of affairs was equivalent to, or perhaps even worse than that of his world during the clan war era. There had been constant conflict, and for the majority of the inhabitants of this world, life was an affair that could be brought to an end with circumstances unforeseen suddenly at any moment. Generations of people existed who had never seen a day without the concept of warfare. The territory under the four emperors was independent, and the distant regions that did not fall under the reach of the world government's authority operated largely under autonomy so long as they regularly remunerated the government with its heavenly tribute. Many kingdoms had seceded from the world government to escape this tyrannical isochronism, only to be destroyed soon afterward by unforeseen circumstances. These larger power struggles were the least of his thoughts, however, and the majority of his investigations had comprised of queries about the structure of history and civilization as a whole. He would have preferred an equal understanding of the government, emperors, or the warlords, but acknowledged his lack of expertise on the matter as an unavoidable consequence of his geographical location. Currently he was far removed from the power bases of each of the factions. The government would not tolerate him, of that he was sure. He could deceive them well enough though, joining their ranks in an effort to make contact with these celestial gods. It would be trivial enough to take the cloak and spend his time as a member of the Navy. But any sort of inclination he might have had to the idea, that is, none at all, was dissuaded by the macabre picture reflected in parts by the shadow of numerous untold circumstances that had been so blatantly suppressed before they could reach the world, the greatest amongst them being that of O'Hara. That they condoned slavery was yet another reason behind his opinion that had long been set in stone. The fact that the government, instead of executing or imprisoning these human traffickers who illegally trampled upon the rights of the people they were sworn to protect and sought only to distance themselves from them, spoke volumes of their values for self-image and prestige. Besides, such organizations had never been his calling. He did not need the red tape of bureaucracy slowing him down. In that, the warlords were also considered for a small fleeting moment, but with that organization, the problem lay in the cost of doing so. He had nothing to offer their faction that would match the worth of what he wanted in return. No deeds worthy of praise, no influence with which to negotiate, nothing he possessed could serve as an initial bargaining chip to join that group of criminals who fought for the world government. Any attempts to affiliate himself with the other factions such as the revolutionaries would meet the same problems, and the various other fragmented organizations and powers were too scattered to be of use. The only option left to him was paradoxically his best one. He could work the intricacies of the only system that left him content with the ease of familiarity. So, it had to be the pirates then. An occupation that rewarded cunning, ability, and most of all power. He might lack the latter, for he was weaker than he ever had been, with his current situation, but did not need it to seek the answers he sought. Moreover, by doing so he could have. Ah, Sasuke. So here you are, I was looking for you since the dawn. A rough voice called out, snapping Sasuke from his thoughts. So you were cloud watching all this time? Sasuke sighed and leaned backward, enjoying the warm sunshine and the gentle breeze that brought along with it a freshness that could not be found on the surface. These ruins were abandoned, yet they created a spot good enough to relax in even after centuries of decay. Sasuke felt the rustle of the leaves and experienced the rumble of the clouds. The flowers sang their own songs and the bees created their own rhythms. The gentle wind and the waves formed by clouds serenaded with distinct notes, even as the sun mesmerized him in her own melodies. Clouds came floating into the landscape, no longer to carry rain or usher storm, but to add color to the sunset sky. Sasuke sighed once again and closed his lone eye. Shikamaru Nara would have turned green with envy. The study of the clouds is considered a noble profession in Skypiea, Wiper spoke as he walked closer with loud clacking footsteps. But I had assumed that the way of the sword was more of your call, considering your accomplishments in the latter. The man came to a stop beside him, and his clothes rustled blatantly for a moment before he perched himself beside him with a loud thud. Leisurely, Sasuke opened alone at a glance at the shirtless man covered by various tribal tattoos with his dark brown hair arranged in a mohawk that followed into a segmented braid that went past his waist. The study of the sky, you say? Sasuke dully hummed, his tone flat with disinterest. Sounds astoundingly interesting. Koilomaji generates solutions for everyday life and helps us to answer the great mysteries of the world. In other words, it could be said to be one of the most important channels of our knowledge. Wiper grunted even as he slouched into the ground, the sarcasm completely flying over his head. All sorts of things can happen. This is the end of